Hello, my name is Brian. I'm a writer with over 25 books published on Amazon, and welcome to the next video in this series. This is Chapter 10, Nightmares. Father Jacob and Father Kyle have an enormous argument. Kyle insists that they tell Philip everything they know about St. John's Chapel. Jacob refuses, though he will not say why. Mrs. Fitz is terribly angry too. In his room, Philip has one of his worst nightmares yet. I hope you like this latest chapter. Please click subscribe and leave a like for this video. Every subscriber drives back the shadows, and every like shines a light in dark places. Chapter 10, Nightmares. Father Jacob's eyes narrowed, and he got dangerously quiet. He set his eyes on Father Kyle and took in several shallow breaths. Kyle glared back at him. He was not cowed by Jacob's anger in the least. Brother Philip stood to one side with his eyes on the floor and his hands clasped in front of him. "Blake, we have to tell the lad everything," Kyle said. "How dare you call me by my Christian name?" Jacob snapped. "Blake, we have to tell the lad everything." "How dare you call me by my Christian name?" Jacob snapped. "I am Father Jacob. You will address me properly." "Fine," Kyle said with a scoff. "I'll call you whatever you like, but you're not listening. And you were not listening when I told you to keep your nose out of my business. It's not just your business. It has to do with Philip, too. You have to tell him what happened here. What I say or don't say to the lad is none of your business either. You're such a stubborn old mule. He deserves to know what he's sharing this house with." "He's sharing this house with God," Jacob barked. "Just God. That's all." "That's not true, and you know it," Kyle countered. "There's something else." Mrs. Fitz entered the room carrying a tea tray. She placed it on Father Jacob's desk and took in a great breath. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Father, he's right. There's something evil in this place, something you promised me was gone for good." "Is that what you told her?" Kyle asked in shock. "You stay out of this," Jacob shouted. "You didn't tell her that you failed to cast it out?" Mrs. Fitz stamped her foot, and both men stopped talking. "Fiddlesticks!" she exclaimed. "I'm leaving. I'll not be in the same place as that thing down there. I'll only come here for Mass." She stormed to the door and stopped in the hallway. "Michael!" she shouted. "We're leaving." She went to the front door where her son met her. He had been waiting in the sitting room. The muscular man stared angrily at Father Jacob. His mother swatted him in the belly with the back of her hand and led the way outside. "Let's go, Michael." He sniffed and sent one last unfriendly look at both priests. Then he followed her out. Jacob turned to look at Philip. "Go to your room, boy," he barked. Philip looked up and his mouth dropped open. It had been many years since he was sent to his room. But he obeyed the father and left immediately. He sat on his bed with a sigh and looked around. His eyes lit on his mobile phone and he creased his brow. For the first few weeks of being in Hunter's Creek, he had checked it several times a day to see if it had picked up a single. After a while, it became less and less important to him. When he called his mother on the phone in the rectory office to let her know where he was, the urge to use the cell phone decreased too. His anxiety about missing emails or text messages dissipated to almost nothing. He found that he felt almost liberated after being without the phone for so long. The voices of Fathers Jacob and Kyle rose into another argument. Philip tried to ignore them. Instead, he thought about his newfound freedom from being connected. Father Kyle stormed out of the church an hour or so later. His frustration at Father Jacob was enormous. The elderly priest was as stubborn as they came, and Kyle had failed to convince him to tell Philip anything. Jacob stood in the hallway and watched Kyle leave. He muttered and grumbled to himself for a long time after the other man left. Philip came down the stairs and slipped past Jacob on his way to the kitchen. The father scowled at the boy's back and sighed. "Where are you going?" he asked irritably. "I'm going to make dinner," Philip replied. "Don't bother," Jacob barked. "Not on my account. I'm not hungry." Philip nodded and went to the stairs again. "Where are you going now?" "I'm not hungry either." "Humph," Jacob grumbled. "The good Lord Jesus missed a meal or two, too. It didn't do him any harm." "Yes, Father," Philip said. Then he continued up the stairs. Father Jacob went to the rectory office with the idea of sitting and thinking. After only about 20 minutes, he harumphed and got to his feet. The rectory office was not big enough to contain his anger. The rage he felt was almost too big for the whole church to hold. He stood and walked back and forth in front of his desk. He scowled and grumbled as he paced. He fought against it, but the memories of more than 20 years ago tried to flood his mind. He pushed back against them and set his eyes on the crucifix on the wall. This cross was not adorned with the figure of the Christ on it. It was a plain crucifix made of brass. Jacob reminded himself that the cross only represented Jesus. It was not holy in and of itself. It was just a symbol. He closed his eyes and said a quick prayer to the Holy Trinity. That did nothing to minimize his anger, although it did help him slow his breathing. He focused on breathing in and out and repeated the prayer a dozen times or so. Still, his emotions were too much for the small room. He scurried to the kitchen and out through the back door. Once on the landing outside, he paused and took a deep breath. He stared across the empty fields and set his eyes on the setting sun. It hurt his eyes a little bit, but he watched fully as it raced to the horizon. He was halfway past the far edge of the world when he heard screaming. Philip went to his room instead of trying to prepare anything to eat. The grief he would get from the father was not worth the satisfaction of eating dinner. He could get by without a meal for one night. He picked up his cell phone and studied it. He did not bother starting it up. He knew there would be no signal, and he was not certain it had any charge left. It might not even turn on. He placed it carefully back on the side table and lay back on his bed. He focused his eyes on the ceiling and was not even aware when he fell asleep. He looked around at the landscape uneasily. It was not familiar to him, and that forced him to recognize that he was dreaming. So far, it was not a bad dream, but he had experienced so many nightmares lately, he was anxious and on edge. At any moment, this dream could become something else entirely, and he tried to brace himself against that. Even as that thought ran through his head, the seemingly pleasant scene in front of him turned sinister. It was not anything he could see. Rather, it was a feeling. It reminded him of watching a movie where the background music became tense and full of dread. It filled the scene with fear without changing its appearance in any way. The sunny fields and rolling hills suddenly disappeared. The blackness around him was complete. The scent of grass and flowers was overpowered by the stench of rotting vegetation. When his sight came back, it was not gradual or from a distant point of light. It came back as quickly as it had disappeared. There were no green fields to admire. Everything in sight was bathed in an eerie red glow. The sight of figures tied to pillars while they were tortured appeared to him. He could not make out their faces. Their heads hung low from weariness or agony. They were stripped bare, and every inch of their bodies had been marred by whiplashes. They groaned and moaned in pain, while small creatures whipped them mercilessly. The tiny imps delivered their blows with glee, and then turned to him to smile widely. They were proud of the pain they inflicted. A much larger creature appeared out of the red mist. It stood upright like a man, but it was no man. Its blood-red skin gave that away immediately. It marched slowly out of the background and surveyed the prisoners. They implored him with their eyes. Some of them begged for mercy. Some of them were too weak to do either, or they had given up on searching for mercy from this evil being. Then the creature's eyes came to rest on Philip. It grinned widely and started strutting towards him. "Well, well," it hissed happily. "Fresh meat." Philip's eyes grew with fear, and he turned and started to run. He sat up suddenly and howled in fear. Even his own ears were deafened by the sounds of his screaming. Thanks for listening so far. I'll see you again soon.